All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Cinnamon Moffett. I'm the research program manager here at Oregon State University, and I am very happy that you are part of our seminar today. I see a couple faces that might be new to us, so I just wanted to let folks know this is a hybrid event. So we probably have lots of folks online. I'm seeing a yes. So folks online, thank you so much for being here as well. I just want to let you know that your mics, camera, and screen shares have been disabled for today's talk, but we hope that you put any questions you might have for us into the chat box. If there are technical issues, our volunteer Roseanne will help you through those. But if there are questions for our presenter today, Roseanne will read them out at the end when we go into question and answer, and so that your questions can be answered by today's speaker. For folks in the room, I ask if you have questions for our speaker that you just raise your hand so I can bring you a mic so that folks online can be engaged in the conversation as well. Or there's a mic stand up on the corner, so you're welcome to go there if you would like. I wanted to make a couple of announcements and then I'll get started with everything today. I wanted to let you know that next week's seminar, which is May 23rd, we're going to have Will Ostrike, who is a postdoctoral fellow for the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, here talking about the collective behaviors in a dynamic ocean ecosystem. So basically talking about how ecosystem dynamics drive behaviors of individuals, groups, and populations. I'm really excited about that talk, so I'm hoping that folks can come back next week. Same place, same time. But if you are curious about any of our events, you can go to our homepage, HMSC, go to the events, and you will be able to see all the details for anything that you might want to join us for. But for today, let me tell you about today's speaker. Laura Gabel is a coastal ecologist with the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, otherwise known as DOGAMI. She earned her bachelor's degree in engineering science and mathematics from Penn State University and a master's degree in geology from the University of Oregon. Laura's overarching goal is to help Oregon coastal communities become more resilient through applied research and outreach with an emphasis on collaboration and stakeholder engagement. Laura's research focuses on hazards and risks associated with the subduction zone earthquakes and tsunamis, as well as landslides, coastal erosion, and sea level rise. She particularly enjoys fostering clear and effective communication and making a tangible impact on community by bridging technical knowledge with real-world application. That sets you up. So no expectations at all about an amazing communicator. But with that, we're going to hand the mic off to Laura and take it away for us.
Is Roseanne, is my mic working? Yes. Okay, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for coming here and online. So yeah, Cinnamon did set that up really nicely. So one of the many things that DOGAMI does is work on research, applied research, and preparedness for the next Cascadia earthquake and tsunami. And the project I'm specifically here to talk to you about today is working on tsunami evacuation in Seaside, specifically looking at vertical evacuation. And the photo I'm showing is from the 1960, it's from Puerto Saavedra, Chile, after the 1960 earthquake and tsunami, the largest earthquake on record. And this is an example of a community that knew what to do. These people did not have sirens. They didn't have reverse 911 on their phones. They knew there was a long earthquake, and they knew that meant that they needed to evacuate the low-lying coastal town they lived in and walk up the hills behind their town. And so that's them in the foreground. Looking back down in the distance is the ocean and their inundated communities. This is our goal in Oregon. We are not here yet. They have this knowledge of what to do in this event passed down from generation to generation. The last Cascadia event was in the year 1700, so more than 300 years ago. And so we are working towards this. And this is an example of personal preparedness. These people knew what to do one-on-one, but we're working at all levels. Many people on the Zoom call and in this room are also working on this, both at a community scale, at a state level, federal level, and at the personal level. And that's what the project I'm going to talk to you about today is, just one piece of this. Okay, so specifically, I'm here to talk about improving tsunami evacuation at a community scale for communities where high ground is difficult to reach, through identifying and then prioritizing very specific project ideas. And the focus is on infrastructure, such as vertical evacuation or bridge retrofits, seismic retrofits. The team of people working on this project, it's led by Principal Investigator Dr. Jonathan Allen. He's on the call today. He also lives in Newport, same as I do, working out of our Newport office. And myself and Fletcher O'Brien, who is in our main office in Portland, have been working on this project. So I'm going to focus my results today on Seaside. I've done this work in Cannon Beach as well, and a little bit in Gold Beach. And it really builds on a decade of work I've been doing looking at evacuation modeling in all of the coastal communities in Oregon. And really, basically, this is like a refinement of that work and trying to quantify the improvements that you get from various infrastructure improvements you can do in a community to improve life safety at a community scale. So just to set up the idea of what I mean by a vertical evacuation structure, this is a structure where when horizontal high ground, which is what we call natural high ground in the hills behind a community, when that is too far to be reached, instead of horizontal evacuation, you go vertical. You bring high ground down to where the people are. So this is a very new idea in the United States. Japan has been building tsunami vertical evacuation structures for quite a long time. The first one in the United States was built in 2016 up in Washington, in Acosta. It's their elementary school. This is near Westport, Washington. And then the very building we're standing in right here is the second one ever in the United States, built by OSU. And the third is a tower style building, so different. The first two were buildings, and the third one is a more simple tower structure in Tokeland, Washington, on the Shoalwater Bay Indian Tribe property, and they helped fund it as well. So these are the three examples we can point to for what these things can look like and how to get them built. And there are actually 3 more VES, as we call them, vertical evacuation structures. 3 more VES have been funded through various FEMA resilient communities funding sources, and in Cannon Beach, not a VES, but a bridge resilience study to assess the importance of well, not to assess the importance, I'm assessing the importance of the bridge, but we all understand that it's very important for evacuation in Cannon Beach, but they secured an almost $500,000 hazard mitigation, HMGP, hazard mitigation grant program grant to assess the feasibility of the current bridge. And that's going to lead into another proposal to actually retrofit that bridge to ensure it remains standing. So it's another example of an infrastructure project to increase life safety at the community scale. And I don't know the dates on when the Astoria Columbia Memorial Hospital is going to get built, but they have secured funding to rebuild the hospital to withstand the earthquake, and a wing will be a tsunami refuge. And then Westport and Ocean Shores both have funding to build a tower of some sort in their communities. And I guess this might, the next slide will be a good way to lead into this. So we're really taking Washington's lead on this work. They've been doing this work since going back to the early 2000s. Their geography is a lot different than Oregon's. They have really long barrier spits with large amounts of people that live on Long Beach Peninsula, Grays Harbor, Ocean Shores, and there's not a lot of high ground in this area. Oregon is lucky in that we have a lot of high ground quite near our coastal population centers. Seaside is an example of an exception to that. There are a few exceptions, but they are exceptions to a more general pattern of ample high ground. It does not take away from the importance of other forms of evacuation preparedness, signage, and practicing evacuation routes, and other things of that nature, which would be a whole other talk. But so Washington started in 2010 with Project Safe Haven, and they worked very closely with the communities to understand the community's concerns, what kind of VES they might want to build, structure, design, multi-use, what else could this structure do for the community on a day-to-day basis. And then that was followed by a manual for cities and counties on how to actually get one of these things built. It's, as you can imagine, a very big lift to get one of these implemented. It's a very long process and involves support at every level. So they issued a manual in 2018, and then after that, they continued to refine the evacuation modeling and are they were doing something similar to what I'm going to show you today. Okay, so just set the scene. Seaside is a popular large town for our coast in Clatsop County in the northwest corner of Oregon. And on the right is a map of Seaside, and it is simple on purpose. I'm trying not to, what I'm showing you today is like a general feeling of the community. We're not trying to resolve individual streets and intersections. And you'll understand why that is in a minute here. But so the basic idea, all the roads are drawn in white. Green is outside of the tsunami zone. So this is the same green that you see on our orange, yellow, green evacuation brochures for all coastal communities in Oregon. And I hope you can see pretty clearly that almost all of Seaside is within the tsunami zone. This is their challenge. The other challenge for Seaside in particular is that there are two bodies of water that come in and bisect town. The Nicanicum River comes in here and runs shore parallel down through town. And then Neawanna Creek does the same thing on the other side. So 101 runs down the middle. And so these two bodies of water really separate town from high ground to the east. So that's the size of the tsunami zone. It's the majority of town here. The tsunami, what the tsunami we expect to do in Seaside, the subduction zone is about 50 miles offshore of Seaside. And the wave is expected to reach the promenade, so at the back of the beach, about 20 minutes after the start of earthquake shaking. And it'll take about 10 minutes for it to move across west to east across the community. There will also be an early arrival that will come in via the estuary and up both creek channels. So there will be some earlier arrivals, but generally speaking, it is a west to east move over the landscape. And these numbers are important because what we're doing here is we're looking at these really unique wave arrival times. It's different, say, in Tillamook Head to the south here, which is just cut off the map here, versus the back of the hills to the right here, which so those times can be different within one community. Those wave arrival times can really vary, and that plays into what we're looking at today. Okay, so we know the tsunami is coming to Seaside, and we know how large the tsunami zone is, but where are the people in this hazard zone? So we're able to take a look at where people are with a lot of depth, because we have John and Fletch put together these really robust data sets of where permanent residents and an estimate of temporary overnight visitors are within the tsunami zone. So we have a data set of building footprints. So every building within the coastal community, and whether it's classified as residential or commercial or agricultural. And we also have 2020 census data. And so to determine an estimate of permanent residents, we took that 2020 census data and distributed it amongst all buildings classified as residential. And for temporary, we took every building classified as a hotel or a motel. We also identified campgrounds and marinas with liveaboards, and we filled them to max capacity as best we could based on information about each building or campground. And that gives you an idea, a snapshot of potentially how many people may be in the community at the time of the event. Maybe not, but Seaside has a lot of people that come to visit, especially in the summer, especially Hood to Coast weekend or their beach volleyball weekend. They can have even more than 20,000 people come just for the day from Portland to recreate. And so we are trying to provide a range of kind of a low-end estimate to a high-end estimate of how many people the city will be helping to evacuate from the tsunami zone and taking care of after the fact. So population, we're putting these people in these buildings. And so I'm going to show you the population in its circles, and the size of the circle is proportional to how many people are in that building. And the permanent residents are showing separate, I'm showing them separately from temporary just to start. So hopefully you can see that a pattern emerges pretty quickly of the temporary residents, the visitors. They're all very close to the beach, as far away from high ground as you can be. And for permanent residents, a bit more of a more uniform spread around town, but there are some pretty large circles much closer to high ground. And that's a pattern we see in all of our coastal communities. You have, of course, people come to the coast to be on the beach and be near the beach. And so that's where you have the most hotels and those sorts of things. And the locals tend to live in the quiet residential neighborhoods tucked away on the other side of 101. And so that's the pattern we're seeing here. And this plays into, you know, where you're putting proposing new infrastructure and where you're proposing improvements will inform which population specifically you're going to help, depending on where you put it. So that's something that cities need to be made aware of and understand as a part of the choices that they're making. So, I should summarize the numbers. So we've got about 7,000 people, permanent residents in the city of Seaside within the tsunami zone. And our estimate of overnight visitors is 10,000. So a total population that I'm going to be kind of counting is 17,000 people. And from now on, any maps that show these population circles, they're a combined permanent plus temporary. Because of communications with several coastal communities, they're like, people are people. The people that are here on the day of the event are the people we have. It doesn't matter if they're a local or a visitor. Okay, so now we know where the people are. How do those people get out of how do they get to high ground? There's 5 main safety destinations in Seaside. 4 of these are the easterly people that are heading due east to the high ground east of town: Lewis and Clark, 12th Street, Broadway, and Spruce Street / Avenue S. And then the 5th one is Southern Seaside evacuates up Tillamook Head via Sunset Boulevard. And just a side note, the new Seaside School and EOC is up here on Spruce, which is, again, a really fantastic story that we can talk about later if people want to know. Okay, so as you noticed, maybe these routes cross 1, if not 2, of these sets of bridges over the Nicanicum and Neawana Creek. So there's 10 of them in total that cross these 2 bodies of water in the city, 4 of which were built after 1995. The remainder were built before 1995. The importance of that date is that is when the realization of Cascadia really was becoming well known in the Pacific Northwest. And that's when bridge design started to incorporate seismic loads into their design requirements. So these 4 bridges were built with some earthquake design in mind, not to current modern codes, but some. And I spoke with an engineer at ODOT who said that it is likely, but this is not an official opinion, that, it is quite possible they will remain standing after the earthquake due to their age and their orientation being in an east-west orientation. So the others are some like 100 years old. The Highway 101 bridge was built in 1930. Okay, so now we've kind of set the scene. We have Seaside in the tsunami zone. We have people distributed amongst this zone pretty full throughout. There aren't really quiet spots within the city. And what are we doing here? So what we're doing is we're proposing hypothetical improvements. So we're using a GIS model to hypothetically compare what evacuation is going to look like if we try different things. So let's see what it looks like if every bridge is foreshore passable after the earthquake by doing a seismic retrofit on it, on all 10 bridges. So we can do that in our GIS model. And then really, we know that VES is a necessity in Seaside. And so we talked extensively with the city on where they would like to see these things considered. And the results of this work are things that they can then take and put in a proposal to a FEMA grant program to start the process of pursuing these. So that's kind of the overarching goal that we're doing here. So we ended up deciding on 5 locations. The first one is really the main one, which is labeled as an A on the map, is the convention center here downtown, right by the turnaround. This is city property. They have a parking problem as it is, and they want to build a parking structure. Why not make that parking structure be double duty and also be a VES? This is something the city is in support of and aware of, but we're helping to quantify the improvement that you would get from this effort. Okay, so before I show you the results, they're kind of busy. So I just thought I would set the scene. So these are total population circles. So now they're all a lot larger because I've summed permanent and temporary. And all the roads you've been seeing are drawn in white. What I'm going to do is redraw roads in black that we consider surviving. So the way we do this is we have these distances to safety, and that distance to safety takes into account steep slopes and difficult terrain to walk on. And we have those wave arrival times. A distance divided by a time equals a speed. So we end up with this look at what is this average speed that a person from any given location within the tsunami zone needs to travel in order to get out of the tsunami zone ahead of the wave, beat the wave. This is where we came up with our evacuation modeling program, beat the wave that we called it. So, and then what we're doing is we decided on a threshold speed. Above that threshold speed, we don't think it's realistic to make it to high ground in time. It's very difficult to maintain a sprint for 1.5 miles, which is how far it is from the promenade to high ground in some locations in Seaside, to maintain a sprint across the debris and other earthquake damage that will be on the roads. That is a very big lift. And it doesn't mean it's not doable, but at a community scale. So we chose this threshold of 4 feet per second. This is 2.7 miles an hour. And the reason for that speed is this is what is used to design the length of crosswalks at intersections in the United States. And it's, you know, kind of a medium to slower end of a walk. And so I will redraw all the roads that can reach high ground at 4 feet per second or slower as black, and the rest will remain white. And then buildings adjacent to black roads, the people in those buildings, I'm going to count as survivors, and the people adjacent to the white roads will count as the unlikely to survive. And so the point is you can then attach numbers to these scenarios. And the point isn't to literally take these results to be, this is what it's going to look like in Seaside, but it's comparative. We'll compare what things look like now to how much improvement can you get from some of these hypothetical ideas. So here are results where what I'm calling current conditions, those 4 bridges that were built after 1995, are passages allowed across them in the model, passages not allowed across the other bridges, and there's no VES. This is just high ground is where it is. Those 4 bridges are available, and this is what you get. So in terms of numbers, 25% of the total population in the tsunami zone can reach high ground. That's about 4,000 people. And then on the flip side, that's 75% not likely to survive. And you can see it's really just people east of Neowana Creek, closest to high ground, and then a section here around Broadway in the 101 corridor area. So then what I'm going to do is set up, this is really a comparative tool. That's where it has its most power. So I'm going to show you the same map extent, but with a hypothetical vertical evacuation structure included at the convention center. And then the numbers for that, for surviving and unlikely to survive, will get put down here. And you can see that when you bring high ground into downtown, of course, you're going to have an area in the downtown that can reach high ground in time. And so they are within that 4 foot per second threshold. So this increases survivability in Seaside by 25%. You go from 25% to 50%. So it's an additional 4,000 people, or 25% of that total population. It's about 1/3 of a mile in either direction that it really helps. And beyond that, because of the timing of the wave arrival, it's too far to go still. Okay, so next I'm going to flip. I'll keep the current conditions as is, but I'm going to flip to, instead of a vertical evacuation structure at the convention center, I'm going to show you when all the bridges are available. No VES, but just instead of 4 bridges like we have in the current conditions, it's going to be all 10 bridges are available. And when I first saw this, my jaw dropped. It's basically no change. At a city scale, when you're looking at the whole city of Seaside, allowing all the bridges, like if you retrofitted all 10 bridges and ensured they were available for evacuation, it would improve things from where they are right now by 1%, or about 300 people. And when I thought about it, you know, it did make sense, because you still have extremely long distances to high ground from the western downtown portion of Seaside, from the promenade. It still is extremely far, and it does shorten routes a little bit, but it's still just that distance across here is just, it's very far. And I think that this is, even though it's sort of a result of nothing, I think it's really impactful, because many, many people have been focused on the bridges in Seaside for a long time, myself included. And this is helping to helping the city to understand where they should be focusing their energy, their money, and their time moving forward, to understand where you're going to get the most bang for your buck with any infrastructure projects to improve evacuation community-wide. This is not to say bridges are not important for many reasons in Seaside and other coastal communities, day-to-day, recovery after Cascadia, lots of reasons. So just to repeat this, but kind of clean it up a little, because I know it's really busy with all the population circles and everything. So this is the same data. This is the current conditions, just showing what the roads in black as being likely to survive. And I'm just going to step through them. So the current conditions, and then here's with all bridges in. So it's basically the same extent of town can reach high ground in time. And then if you add a vertical evacuation structure at the convention center, you see you get more coverage in town. And then say you add another one, say you add one at the outlet malls up there in the, just off 101 there by 12th, you increase that coverage more. And so these are the sort of things that we're communicating with the city so that they have an idea for their long range planning, where they're headed, how many do we even need if we were to be able to acquire them. So another way to do this is to look at those number of survivors that I showed you in the charts next to the comparison maps and just compare those numbers for each of these different scenarios. So the height of these gray bars at the very top, this is the total 17,000 people in Seaside. And I'm just going to run through each of the scenarios and compare the number of survivors. And so first we have our current conditions. And so this is the same 4,200 people that I showed you before. And then bridges in, you see a slight increase in number of survivors. And then the next 5 are the 5 sites that I considered VES, one at a time. So each of these scenarios are how many people are expected to survive if a VES is at the convention center, which I've shown you, 8,500 people total, or at the outlet mall or a couple other locations. And you can just see there's a varying level of how effective it's going to be because it's based on where it is in the community and where all the people are in the community. And then you start to play around with adding more. This is a GIS exercise. We can do as many scenarios as we want. And you start to really see those numbers climb, and it starts to approach servicing the entire community as you go to 2, 3, or even 4 structures. I will say Washington, they've done studies like this and tried to answer the question of how many do we need in the state of Washington to save everyone's life who lives on the coast of Washington, and it's upwards of 80. So it's a very different situation than Oregon. So I just wanted to briefly touch on this idea of, I don't want to knock the bridges too much because I've been showing you citywide results. And if you zoom into specific neighborhoods, and if that's your focus, a certain neighborhood within a community, results can look a little different. For the same reason, this is all just so geographically tied, how close or far you are from a VES or a bridge. And so, for example, the Tillamook Head neighborhood in the south, these are the same bar charts I just showed you, but the results are only for the people, permanent and temporary, that live within this boundary here. And this is how many are expected to survive out of that total amount, which is just a little over 2,000 people. And you can see that a VES convention center VES is no different than current conditions. They're all the same. But of course, if you have a hypothetical VES in that area, it's going to help that region a lot more. And you get almost 100% survivors if you introduce a VES in that region. This is at a place called Cartwright Park. And this, no engineering studies have been done on these locations. This is a hypothetical first look at this meant to help the city move forward with determining where and then hiring engineers to assess the viability of different sites. And I'll talk more about that in a second. But another neighborhood that I'm going to focus on for just a minute is Venice Park in the north part of Seaside. It's essentially in the mouth of the Nicanicum River. And it's without any assistance, and this bridge being out, the model makes them come all the way down to 12th Street and go over, and it's too far. And even with bridges in, it's not that helpful. And if you put a vertical evacuation structure at the site of the old high school, it does help quite a bit, obviously, because it's in the right area. But I wanted to just zoom in on this a little bit So here's just the black roads showing you if the bridge is out, so XXL tsunami zone bridge out, no one can cross it. And so you have no lives saved in this scenario. If you allow the bridge to be available, sort of in a similar situation to the citywide, it is too far up Lewis and Clark Road. It's so far that it still doesn't help the majority of the neighborhood. And this is just an oblique photo of that last stretch up Lewis and Clark that they need to travel. And I haven't talked about different tsunami zones, but DOGAMI didn't just model what we call XXL. That is the maximum considered local Cascadia earthquake and tsunami that was chosen by local emergency managers and other advisory committee folks to use for the evacuation maps. But DOGAMI modeled smaller, more likely earthquake and tsunami scenarios. XXL is unlikely. It's a conservative event with a lot of unknowns kind of turned up to 10 in terms of slip and recurrence interval. And so the large tsunami scenario is smaller and is a more likely event to occur. And if you do this same analysis on the large tsunami zone instead of the extra, extra large, you end up with a better looking outcome. And the reason I'm showing you this is because so it doesn't even back off that much. I forget how many 100 feet this is that is reduced, but the point that I think is really powerful is that, and it still doesn't reach all of town, but it's a lot more. Every step uphill is worth taking, and it's not necessarily that you won't survive if you don't get to the XXL line or the blue lines in a lot of our coastal communities, including Newport. That is the largest tsunami that was modeled, and it is quite possible that it will be smaller than that. And so if people are traveling uphill at whatever pace they can, that is a message worth sharing at every level of personal up to the state. What's that? Okay, so next step. So, this is, again, I've been communicating closely with the city. I presented this information to City Council in January, and they're working on the next steps themselves. And what they're going to do with this data is use it in their proposals to pursue funding from FEMA in how to go about the design and build of a vertical evacuation structure of some kind in Seaside. And there's a lot to be done before that happens. So first, they have to decide what it is they're aiming for. Is it bridge retrofits versus VES? Is it a plan of 2 VES from the start? Or, there's a lot of choices that they have to make and talk about with their constituents. And then of the sites that they are considering for VES, are these sites viable? Is there enough capacity in the convention center parking lot for a structure like this? What does the bedrock look like there? Is there bedrock there? And then ultimately the goal will be to pursue FEMA funding to move this idea forward of 1 or more VES and maybe bridge retrofits. And that's it. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to a good discussion now, hopefully.
I have questions, but I'll actually try to hand it off to others. So I'm going to bounce back and forth between those folks online and the folks in the room. So Roseanne, do we have anybody yet? Okay, so for folks online, go ahead and put any questions you might have into the chat box and we'll work through them. I see a couple hands in the room, so I'll start my run up the stairs. Hang on, everyone.
Thanks for that, Laura. I think that's a great analysis. A couple of questions I have. One, first, you said the timing of arrival, it's from the start of the quake or at the end of the quake? Because that's a 5 or 6 minute difference, right?
Yeah, so I didn't go into this because when I presented this to the Cannon Beach City Council last week, I confused everyone. But it's a great question. So when we talk about the wave arrival time, we are talking about the start of the earthquake shaking. So it will take 3 to 5 minutes for the earthquake to actually unzip, to actually rupture. And the wave arrival times that we're using and that we're showing include that shaking time. So when I say it arrives in 20 minutes at the promenade, 3 to 5 of those minutes are drop, cover, hold. You're waiting for the ground to stop shaking. And so one thing I didn't mention, but a part of the method is when I said we have these distances and times, and we're a distance divided by time. It's how we derive these average minimum speeds that people need to travel. We take 10 minutes off of those wave arrival times. So say a safety destination is 30 minutes, the wave arrives in 30 minutes. We take 3 minutes off for earthquake shaking, and then another 7 off for what we call evacuation delay, because our modeling is on roads and none of us are on a road right now. The clock starts ticking when the earth starts shaking. So for the first several minutes, we will all just be waiting out the earthquake shaking. And then as soon as it's over, we will go to the nearest road to begin. Well, we won't in this building, but in other buildings, we would be leaving the building and going outside to begin walking. And so in order to account for that in these calculations, we take 10 minutes off. So instead of 30 minutes for that math, I'm using 20 minutes. Does that make sense?
Yes, no, that's really important.
And something that I do in my Beat the Wave evacuation analyses for coastal communities is, and I think I might put it in the report for this project as well, is we change that 10-minute delay to a 5-minute delay for the idea of if you can begin your evacuation sooner, you will be more likely to make it. It's a pretty simple idea, but I can show it quantitatively with these kind of scenarios. So I have a scenario. I was actually tempted to put it in and I decided not to, of the same results. So instead of a VES, just change that 10 minutes to 5 minutes, and it improves things a lot. And that is free. That's just messaging. That's just educating people on not delaying, not trying to find the cat, evacuating immediately. It saves lives. It's been documented to save lives in Japan. People that wait, versus people that don't wait, it's really it's a marked difference. And we do play around with that in the modeling. Again, it's like a back of the envelope look at the improvement you get. Or like camping, you're already kind of outside, so it's maybe not as realistic to say 10, and it's 5 is more reflective of somebody who's already out and about, or somebody shopping in downtown Cannon Beach. They're already on the sidewalk, so they're kind of ready to go quicker.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
One more. I also really like the analysis, for example, that showed that the bridges just would be a waste of money for the most part. How much are those towers? Can you sort of put a number on that?
I was just talking about that this morning with some colleagues in Washington, and it really varies. So a tower like they have in Tokeland, which I mean, I could go back to that slide just to talk about this, but it really varies on what it is that you want to build. But a tower like Tokeland's is the low end member of cost, and I believe it was $5 million. Cinnamon can talk to the cost of this building, and not specifically the cost of this building, but the cost to make this building a VES versus a normal building. I believe it's like 10 to 15% more. What do you?
Yes.
Yeah. And I believe, so the Acosta School, I believe it's the same. It was about 10 or 15% additional cost to build it to withstand the earthquake shaking and the tsunami forces, including the water and any debris entrained in the water. But that's a very rough estimate. These 3 are the only 3 examples we have to go off of in the States at this point. But we will have more in the next couple of years, thanks to these other structures that are getting built.
All right. I see we have questions online. So for folks in the room, hang in there. We'll get there.
Does the state, OSU, FEMA, or any other organization provide planning capacity resources for communities without the means to plan the implementation of VES?
That's what this is really, is us providing these communities with information to help guide them through the process. OEM, Oregon Emergency Management, has a mitigation officer, and their job is to assist cities and counties in applying for different resilience grants. There are people at different levels of government that their job is to assist local communities. It's a huge lift. It's very difficult. There's match involved in these grants. That can be really difficult for the local jurisdictions to address. And all of these, the Acosta School, the moving of the Seaside School, which I didn't talk about because it's not a VES, but these projects take years, if not decades, and it's a big challenges in PR and politics and money and so on. But it's piecemeal as it can get done.
All right, question in the room.
So first off, thank you for this talk. And I have two questions. The first one, is there data like this available for people who live in Washington? I have family members who live on the Long Beach Peninsula, for example, and now I'm worried.
You know, okay, first let me say, I sometimes forget to say this because I get so in the weeds on this every day, but for the most part, this is a survivable event. If people are prepared, if people know what to do, if they know to protect themselves during the earthquake and then to promptly evacuate, it is survivable for most people. It does depend on where you are. There will be some unfortunate people that are in, at the very tip of, the collapse of planes or something. And, but for the most part, if people are prepared, and I didn't put a slide in about this, I don't think, maybe I did, but in Oregon, we have an online tsunami evacuation zone viewer. And so even when you're somewhere that you don't live or work, you can go to OregonTsunami.org and find your way to our online viewer and get information on where you are and what the ideal route is for that location and how fast you need to travel to get out of the tsunami zone from that location. And so we have worked with Washington to help get this same information available for them. So the same website, it's nvs.nanus.org, but you can find it through OregonTsunami.org, which is a little bit easier to remember. You can get there. But so for Washington specifically, they really were leading the case. So if you leading the charge on this, so you should go to, if you Google DNR Washington tsunami, you'll get to their website. And so this is the first thing they did in 2010, Project Safe Haven. And I think you'll find that interesting. But then really this one, a guide to tsunami vertical evacuation options, they have one issue for each county. And so I'm just showing you the Pacific County title pages. But yeah, I would go to this actually. But also check out the online viewer because I think that will be helpful for you.
Will do. Thank you very much. And then my second question, this is kind of a mix of geology and engineering. What kind of site are you looking for to place one of the VESs? Is there specific geologic things that you're looking at, or what's the deal there?
I mean, that's a great question. It depends. It depends what you care about most. I mean, so for instance, this building, this was the location. So there wasn't really a choice in, oh, the geology is better somewhere else, I don't think.
We looked at, there was a whole committee that looked at some other options, but they all had a real similar geologic kind of footprint to this building. So there wasn't a lot of choices.
And that's a perfect example of like, each community is going to have its own set of variables. And if the goal of this is life safety, that I would hope would be the first priority. What location is best for that? Where is it the closest to the most numbers of people? But that's a really important consideration. What if there's spot A and spot B, and spot A is a little bit better as far as how many people it would serve, but spot B, it would cost half as much to build because there's bedrock available and there's not in spot A. That's a choice that the city or county could make. And so it's a great question, and it's going to be up to, that's like another step past what we're doing. We're helping get the creative juices flowing, and then it's going to be up to, geotechnical consultants and working with the cities to evaluate those cost benefit analyses. Yeah, great question.
All right, questions in the room?
Thanks. Great talk, Laura, and really interesting information. I'm going to follow up a little bit on what you were just talking about, Mimi, because you talked about them trying to get FEMA funds to do that. And a lot of times, things that are shovel ready, that they've done that sort of analysis and figured out which sites have the bedrock or what those costs are going to be, will make a big difference. And so can you speak to that at all in terms of, has the city started thinking about, oh, we're going to need to raise X amount of dollars just to evaluate where to put these and which ones, I mean, you've got a lot of information about some sites that might be very effective, but, so I just wanted to see if you could speak to that at all.
That's a great question. So I've been a little lazy in just saying FEMA funding. So this structure was not funded by FEMA funds. It was funded privately. The Acosta School also was not funded by FEMA. FEMA wasn't familiar with VES at this point. They are in floodland, and Acosta got it paid for by a bond. So property taxes paid for that school. And it took at least 2 efforts to get it passed. It did not pass the first time. And I don't know if I can't remember if it passed on the second or third time, but that's, one way to go. That's 2 different ways to go: bond or private funding, or a couple different FEMA funds. So to your question about having shovel-ready projects ready to propose to FEMA actually supports, they will fund, I don't know what they call it, but it's within the same pots of money. They'll fund efforts to look into this. And so the First Street Bridge in Cannon Beach, they have secured a $480,000 FEMA grant to study the status of the current bridge. And then the consultant, Civil West, they're going to assess how much it's going to cost to do a seismic retrofit on the existing bridge. And they're going to propose the cost of a couple other options as well. And then as a part of this first pot of money, they're going to write the majority of the next FEMA proposal to do the actual work that they're going to lay out as a couple of choices. So it's an iterative process, and FEMA supports funding at all levels. And once you're in the system, they really want to support success, and they will help fund you throughout the initial data discovery phases, as well as the actual execution construction. Yeah.
Questions in the room?
Thanks. I was hoping you could talk just a little bit about maybe sort of like why Astoria or why Cannon Beach. I mean, I feel like you guys do really great work all up and down the coast. I feel like anyone living anywhere on the coast would want you to like, come tell us, how can we be better here? So can you maybe speak to a little bit about like, is this something your agency or your group is planning to do everywhere? How do you choose? Or is it someone approaches you? I think that's my first question.
That's a great question. And so it's a little bit of kind of all of the things you just said. So for one thing, I have done an evacuation analysis of every community on the Oregon coast. And you should go download the reports. They're riveting. And in the process of doing those projects, I always am interacting with the local decision makers in those communities to make sure they understand what I'm doing as best I can. As you know, we are small communities on the coast, and we are not staffed up in our local governments. And there's a lot of day-to-day challenges, and to be dealing with a challenge that hasn't happened in 300 plus years and might not happen for another 300 plus years, that can be a hard lift for some people. I feel like we've really been moving the mark on awareness and an acceptance of a recognition of it being worth putting this effort in. And I think that this slide in particular is a testament to that. But as far as, so on one hand, DOGAMI makes a point to make sure that we're covering the whole coast as much as we can. And so it took a decade to do these evacuation analyses for the entire Oregon coast, and even modeling to make new evacuation brochures starting in 2009. Prior to 2009, in a big grant to do modeling for the entire Oregon coast using more updated science, which has resulted in the maps that we have today, the yellow, orange, green maps. But prior to that, we were modeling one community a year of tsunami modeling to really understand what the inundation zone was going to be in these communities. And so that was a really slow rate of progress because we work on soft money and are proposing these things as we can and as we can afford to do smaller or larger pieces. This project in particular, this vertical evacuation project, this is a pilot, and we left it a little bit loose as to how many communities we were going to do. We started with 2 communities, and then we kind of backed it down to just 1 because we weren't necessarily getting the engagement from the community that we really wanted, because nothing, Cinnamon and I were just talking about how projects this big, they don't stick unless they are from the ground up. And so we needed, I can write reports all day long, but if nobody's reading them, then what's the point? So, we've been working side by side with Seaside from the very beginning on this project to make sure that it's something that they can use in the end. And Cannon Beach, actually, Rick Hudson, the emergency manager, he basically hounded me until I did Cannon Beach, because he saw what I was doing in Seaside and he said, I want that done in Cannon Beach. And I want to know if the bridge in my town is it worth me putting all this effort into the bridge? I've been focused on the bridge. Is that not going to be the case? And then I pestered John, and because we had kind of a gap in community coverage for this pilot, I was able to do Cannon Beach as well. So I didn't show you results, but I had the same kind of report for Cannon Beach as well. And the bridge is important in Cannon Beach. So we would love to keep doing this in more communities as the funding becomes available, but there's no funding in the horizon for that necessarily. We get some, this is funded by the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program, and they are a pot of money that's, we ask for money from them every year. We put in proposals for very specific tasks, and every year it depends how much the total amount is, and it's shared amongst all the coastal states and territories. So what we are able to get done in any given year really varies.
And I'll just follow up and say, if you haven't seen our evacuation maps or the Beat the Wave maps, they're in the lobby here. So both summary of those wonderful reports are available in map form.
I have another question, because you mentioned some of your modeling is based on updates from the 2020 census data.
Yeah.
And that you've also been doing this for a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I was curious if you could just speak to, there's changes in populations that happen in the communities over time. Some communities grow and some communities shrink. Did you see very many changes from some of the early maps and analyses with like the 2010 census data versus here we are a decade later? Some things have changed, but some things haven't changed. And so I guess I'm just curious about your sort of perspective about updates on the recent census and any changes.
That's a great question. Okay, so let me clarify. The Beat the Wave evacuation studies that I've been doing for the last decade did not include population at all. It was just those speeds and visually comparing, like the visual comparisons I was showing you here, that same idea, and that was it. I wasn't able to quantify anything the way we can now that we have these population numbers. And we had to choose a threshold in order to extract a in or out kind of idea to really count up what the number of survivors would be. And again, it's just a comparative tool. But so the Beat the Wave work doesn't have any population data embedded in it at all. But I can say, just because we did work with the 2010 census data and have updated it to the 2020 census data, John would be a better person to answer this than I, but he is on Zoom, so he's not allowed to talk. But he could add it to the chat, but I believe we really didn't see a ton of growth. What was that, Cinnamon?
We could unmute John if we wanted to.
We really didn't see significant changes. We did not see significant growth to the coastal communities, I don't think, but I could not be right on that because John and Fletch have spent a lot more time with that data than I have. I just have Fletch tell me what's going on usually.
Roseanne might have something here.
John did put a comment in, and he said, we have a priority list of about 5 key communities.
That's relating to Lindsay's question about how we choose what communities we do the work in. And that's a great point, because, so yeah, we're doing it as funding is available, but we do have we have a priority list of where we think, based on our understanding of the hazard in these different communities, we know where we think the need is the highest. And that played into our choice to go with Seaside for this pilot project. We looked at a bunch of factors. We didn't just want to, not just the highest exposure to tsunami, but also vulnerable communities and representation. And we tried to be open-minded about it. We know that the North Coast gets a lot of attention because it's got the most people and it's the closest to Portland and Salem. And so we are aware of the South Coast. And I will say Gold Beach is a community on the South Coast that we have our eye on, and we've done some work down there, and we'd like to continue working with them on their need, because they also have a pretty significant exposure to the hazard. Does John have another?
Yes, he does. He said there are small changes in population numbers. And someone wrote in, who are the key communities besides Seaside that are on that priority list?
Are you allowed to say, or is it secret?
It's not a secret.
That comment is from, it looks like the mayor of Seaside.
Well, I just was talking to the mayor of Seaside in January. It really depends. You know, one thing I haven't talked about is not just cities and unincorporated communities, but state parks. John and I talk a lot about the vulnerability of state parks. We've got Cape Lookout, Fort Stevens, South Beach State Park. Thousands and thousands of people move through these campgrounds, and all year round, but especially in the summers, of course. And like all visitors, their acquaintance with the hazard and evacuation routes is likely to be lower than those of us that live on the coast. And also, by their very nature, our coastal state parks are low-lying and in rabbit warren-y type environments, as John would say. And so they are a challenge to evacuate, and we recognize that to be an especially vulnerable population. And we do communicate with state parks, and I've done beat the wave analyses in all the major state parks, but we had our eye on doing this work where we're taking it that next step with population data at one of the state parks. I don't know, we didn't settle on it because we didn't end up doing it this year, but one of those ones that I just named with the really high numbers.
Yeah, John just added Gold Beach, Nehalem Bay State Park, Rockaway Beach.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions in the room? We'll do one more because you've been waiting very patiently while we've had it.
Thank you very much for a great presentation. And plus, it's encouraging to know, I didn't know all this work was going on, and I feel better. So thank you.
Good.
So if you don't want to answer this, it's fine. I know we're late on time and it's not exactly your topic, but I'm getting the tsunami part, sort of. I mean, I pay attention. I've looked at the maps. I know where I live and where I frequent and all of that. But the earthquake before all that, what's that going to be like? That's all.
That's all.
I do tend to not put my energy into talking about the earthquake when I'm talking about the tsunami, but it will be a very significant event. And I do not know this from personal experience, but just from, reading lots of accounts from Alaska and Chile and Japan. And it will be several minutes of extremely significant shaking. And it will not be the same style of shaking as what happens in the majority of California earthquakes, which are crustal earthquakes, and the frequency with which the ground will shake is different. It's more of a really long wavelength, rolling shake, and it'll have a loud sound that will go with it. I will say that most buildings that we reside in that are built to modern code will survive this earthquake shaking. The stick-built homes, and they will move in the earthquake, but they will not collapse. They will not pancake. And so I think in my mind, I spend so much time thinking about the tsunami, and it's really, you either get out in time or you don't, and there's not a lot of gray area. There's a lot more gray area with the earthquake, but generally speaking, our modern building codes will, the earthquake is not what's going to kill people in a Cascadia Subduction Zone event. And that was true in Japan as well. It was the tsunami that did the most, that contributed to the large majority of the fatalities. So that's why I tend to not focus on the earthquake so much. It is a very significant hazard in and of itself, of course. And I'm sure it will be very impactful for me, even though I may sound flippant about it when I'm talking about tsunamis.
All right, I think we've run out of time, but I'm just going to reiterate, duck cover hold, go.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, everybody, thank you so very much. Thank you very much.